All right. So this one's going to be a long one. It is, if you liked my theory video on Memento, hopefully you'll like this. This is a theory video on the Straight Story, David Lynch's Straight Story. Um, I went to this theater by myself to watch this in 99 or 98 when it came out. It was one movie I just couldn't get anyone interested in going seeing. It came out on a weeknight. Um, when you told people it was about a guy that rode a lawnmower from Iowa to Wisconsin, you just had a hard time finding interest in it. So I thought, well, I've never been to a movie by myself. I always have plenty of people to go with. I'll go by myself. It was a great experience. Highly recommend you do it on purpose sometime, especially for movies that are there to make you think, because that's what you got to do. You just sit there and think to yourself. And I knew a little bit about this before going into it. I had seen the newspaper article in '94. I don't know how I came across it, about a guy riding a lawnmower from Iowa to Wisconsin. And it struck me because it sounded like something I would do. It sounded kind of fun. I was like, that'd be a good time, get on a lawnmower and just spend a few weeks out on the road with it. Might be kind of cool. And I thought, there's nobody better. At the time I thought this, although now if I had known what it was really going to be and knowing what I know now, I may have not had the same perspective at that time. But at that time, I thought David Lynch is the perfect director for a movie of this sort. A quick comment about the soundtrack, since I'm not going to have any time to really wedge it in here with a lot to discuss. It is Angelo Badalamenti's second best soundtrack. And today it might be his best. For me, Twin Peaks has always been his best. But, I've been listening to Twin Peaks. I've listened to it every year. And it is aged a little bit. It has not aged well. It's just starting to sound old. I know it's weird because I'm old, I guess. I don't know. But it's just not I listen to it and it sounds like it's from another era. Whereas Straight Story still sounds like it was made yesterday. Very good, very relaxing music, as it should be. I liked it so much. One song, when my wife and I did our first dance at our wedding, we played a song from that soundtrack. And someone came up and was like, actually several people came up and said, I've never heard a song like that for a first dance, but they said it was great. And I was like, you got to hear the whole track, the entire soundtrack, because the entire soundtrack is just amazing. Worth your time to give a listen while you're doing something else. Just kind of like this video. Be doing something else. Probably don't want to be sitting here watching it because I'm not going to have any clips or anything. I'm just going to be yapping. So, and I love to talk about movies. So, all right. Anyway, let's get into this a little bit. Now, I remember one guy said the day I was going to see it, he said, well, I heard it's like watching paint dry. A friend of his that had a sneak preview. And I'll tell you, and by the way, major spoilers here, obviously. In fact, I'm going to analyze the entire film. But I remember when he said that, I was like, okay, and a lot of David Lynch movies can be that way. And there are two parallel stories being told in this, all right, with three major scenes. No scene, there are three, when I say three major scenes, the scenes are Rosetta Stones for understanding the entire story, but they are also interlinking. And I'll get to them as we go along through Alvin's journey. But I'll say this. If you watch this movie as simply about a guy who rides a lawnmower from Iowa to Wisconsin, then yes, it's going to be very boring because that's what the movie's going to be about. A guy on a lawnmower who has some encounters and things that aren't that outlandish, things that would possibly happen. Mary Sweeney, one of the writers of the movie, said that she would not say what events really took place and what events were fictitious. Very smart move. To this day, we don't entirely know. There are some things Alvin Straight said himself, though, that confirmed some of the events in this. He broke down just 2 miles away from his brother's home. that happens in the movie and that really happened. But generally speaking, we don't know what scenes really happened, which is fine. Doesn't really matter anyway. It's just kind of interesting. So the one story is very plain, just driving a lawnmower from Iowa to Wisconsin. The other story, though, is about a guy driving a lawnmower from Iowa to the stars. Now, if you've seen the movie, this may be right out of left field. What does that mean, from Iowa to the stars? Okay, notice I didn't say from Iowa to space. How absurd that would sound. I got a lawnmower from Iowa to space. But I said stars. Stars are a little bit different than space, right? I mean, stars aren't stars at all. They're suns. They can even be planets. So what are stars? Stars are something you do on Earth. Stars are something you look up at. Stars are something that they are kind of a fiction, right? They're the way we perceive the world, not necessarily the way the world is. Okay, if you hear a humming noise, it's very windy here right now. So he's just driving from this little town in Iowa to the stars. Now, if you don't believe me on this, if you've ever seen the movie and you have any interest in watching it again, really pay attention to how often you see the stars. It's a lot. It's a lot more than you think. In fact, the opening of the movie is the ending of the movie. In fact, the first seconds of the film is Alvin's entire journey. The opening scene is in the stars with the opening credits and the music. And then you get a view above a combine in an Iowa cornfield. It's from above. And then it's above Lawrence, Iowa. And it moves in and then closes in on Alvin's kitchen. That is his entire journey. He's showing you what this movie is about. He gives it always right under your nose at the very beginning. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to figure it out from just that. But this was done. The speed of the beginning of the movie is deliberately very, very slow. If you're used to watching 30-second TikTok videos, it's going to be hard for you to watch 3-minute YouTube videos. If you only watch 3-minute YouTube videos, you're going to have a really hard time watching 30-minute sitcoms. But MTV used to, one of the things that they had a hard time with, and they may have said this in my previous video, so I'll keep it short, is just the quick editing. Very, very fast editing. Your eye never could actually take any visualizations in. So Lynch does something very important. He gets your eyes adjusted to slow movement. This is important because this movie is from Alvin's perspective entirely, almost. Not always, but almost. So you have to really have a slower pace. So this is something in editing that I can't speak for any other reviewers, but I can speak for myself. Whenever I've reviewed movies, I've made a mistake in that I haven't talked about this nearly enough, where editing isn't always about cropping scenes in together and making sure one scene fits after another. Sometimes it's just about getting your audience adjusted to the pacing of the film itself. And so this opening scene does that brilliantly. Alvin is in his kitchen. He falls. It's very mysterious what's happening. You don't know what's going on in there. And they go inside the kitchen and find him laying there. And Richard Farnsworth, the actor who played Alvin, was going through almost the exact same suffering Alvin Straight was at this time. In fact, he had just horrible pain and suffering at this time. In fact, he ended up committing suicide. I think less than a year. The movie there was an awards ceremony, and it was, I think, months later. He had Farnsworth had committed suicide. He just had arthritis throughout his entire body, and he didn't have to act. He was having a really hard time just being in this film. So his real life condition mimicked Alvin's. And that was important. When we find Alvin on the kitchen floor, all right, needless to say, if you haven't seen this movie, you need to see it to really get the most out of this. When we find, I would imagine, when we find Alvin on the floor, we're going to learn some things. Again, if it's about just riding a lawnmower, it's just an old man laying on a kitchen floor. But if it's about more than that, you start learning some things. The first thing you learn is this. Alvin's journey is going to be very dangerous. It's going to be very dangerous because the guy can't even get up. He had to wait on laying down on his kitchen floor until somebody came and picked him up. He couldn't get up. So imagine if he's on his lawnmower and falls down. He can't get up. He could be in the middle of the road in the middle of the night. So it's showing you something. That this guy is going to do something that for him, maybe not for you, right? But for him, is very, very dangerous. Next, too, is we learned that it's going to be very foolish. You can barely get it. You can't get out of your own kitchen. Now you're going to ride a lawnmower 300 miles, 400 miles. In the movie, it says 350 miles. It was actually 250 miles, but in film, you have to do everything bigger. That's why they even picked a different location, I think, to make a different destination than it actually was. And in the movie, they said it was Mount Zion, Wisconsin. It was another place. But I think they did that to make the distance longer. But got that coffee. So it was going to be a foolish adventure. And the next thing is, we don't know why yet, but Alvin just doesn't have a lot of time. You don't know why that's important yet, but this is all supposed to seep into your subconscious. You're supposed to go, well, this guy is on his last leg, literally, because the next scenes, he goes to the doctor and he says, you need a walker. And Alvin's like, nope. He's like, all right, a second cane. He's quote unquote on his last leg. Lynch is really good at these kind of things. Just you have to look at the subtlety. Where's that term come from? So he says, you need a walker. He says, all right, second cane. And so when he goes to the doctor's office, we learn that he is very, very stubborn. The doctor says, Alvin doesn't want any x-rays. The doctor says, I hear and see you're smoking. He says, you have to stop. He's like, you've got the early stages of bronchitis. The doctor's they're going over it, and Alvin's just, nope. He's not fixing any of this stuff. He doesn't want anything to do with the doctor. And the scene ends with the actor that played the doctor did a really good job. He says, if you don't make some changes, you're going to suffer some serious consequences. And you just, at this point, if you don't know anything about, you would know it's about a guy riding a lawnmower really far, but you'd be like, this guy, why is he needs home care. He needs home care. And so the doctor's office scene is very important. Now, the first of the three major scenes, all right, this is a big scene. You could argue which ones are the most important, but these three scenes are Rosetta Stones for understanding the entire movie. All right, so the first one is sitting in this room watching the storm. They're sitting in a room and they're listening to the storms, Rose and Alvin. And it's showing you that Alvin likes to just sit and observe. Now, I've made a case, and I'll continue to make this case, that when you're interpreting stories and film, as much as you possibly can, do not go off of what the director has offered for your interpretation, or the writer, or whoever. Film's a collaborative process, but try very hard not to go way off the reservation. Well, the director said this one time about this movie, so that applies to this movie. I think that's a really bad idea, and it's not good interpretive principle. Sometimes, though, they will use things from other films or other ideas, and in that case, you kind of have to. So, for example, in The Ninth Gate, you see a guy hung upside down where he's making a figure four with his body. That comes from a tarot card called the Hangman. And so you need to kind of know a little bit about the tarot card to understand exactly what's happening in that scene. Okay, so sometimes you have to do that. But Lynch has said in the past that he used to go to a Big Boys in Los Angeles and just sit and look at the silverware. And he said he just loved to sit and just watch and see what happens. And he says it's just amazing what you can see when you're just sitting. So he has a lot of scenes in this where Alvin is just sitting. And again, you may not think there's much to that, but that's an important part of this film is Alvin and the actual Alvin Straight and David Lynch have a lot in common in that David Lynch likes to take things slow. In a time where no one likes anything to be slow, they want everything right now. And this story is making a case for taking your time, which is what I'm doing. I'm not going to get this video done in 20 minutes. I'm hoping to be at least 36 minutes, as long as the last video. This deserves as much time as Memento, in my opinion. So this scene is where they hear there's a storm. You haven't heard any thunder or seen any lightning quite yet. Rose hears the phone ring. She goes to answer it. You hear her and she goes, "Oh no." And then you hear the lightning, hear the thunder and see the lightning. And then you learn Lyle has had a stroke. Very important scene. And then we arrive at a kind of a juxtapositioning. And this is really interesting. So Rose is on the phone, and this is where we learn that the exact date that Alvin and Lyle had an argument. It's the exact date at which their relationship departed, and was the last time they spoke. And whoever she's talking to on the phone, she's discussing this. Now, she looks out and sees this child, and she sees a sprinkler, which is very much like Blue Velvet, and she sees a ball. And kid grabs the ball, and she's just staring at the kid. You don't think anything of it. In fact, it seems like just a waste of time to have this in there. It's not, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what I want to comment on is David Lynch's history as a filmmaker just absolutely comes to bear into this movie in a way no one could have predicted. I mean, this is really, I don't believe this is his best movie. I think that Mulholland Drive is his ultimate film. But this is Lynch fully matured as a filmmaker, taking everything he's ever done, and it's fitting perfect. That's why I mentioned Blue Velvet. If you remember the beginning of Blue Velvet, there's the dad has a hose, and the hose gets a knot, and that represents that his arteries are clogged. And you see a sprinkler out in the yard and a kid out in the yard with the sprinkler, and the dog is biting at the hose, the water coming out. The scene looks just like that, except not creepy like that scene is. And the scene's very meaningful, like that scene is. Lynch has I didn't list it on here. I think it is in Dune. We see the sand dunes from above looking down, moving very, very slowly. In Wild at Heart, there's in Lost Highway and Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, there's a scene in each one of these where the camera's faced straight down on the highway and the yellow line is just going past the camera. And it is almost a joke for someone who loves David Lynch that in this movie he does the same thing, except it's going really, really slow. In these movies I'm mentioning, it's real fast. It's almost distorted. It's going so fast. And he had a reason in all these movies to show you this. He wanted you to show either distance being traveled or whatever the case. In Lost Highway, it meant a whole lot more than that. But in this, it's just showing you the speed at which he's going until he starts going down the big hill, which we'll get to in a minute. But he, again, shows you that scene of the highway going underneath the camera. And it happens on the bridge as well. He's just showing you kind of Alvin's perspective, how close Alvin is to the road and all that. And so this scene is just a good example of David Lynch's expertise just all coming in and helping him make this movie. And, knowing what I know now, I would have thought someone like Chris Columbus or Rob Reiner or somebody like that would have made a better version of this movie. But if it hadn't been that Lynch, the things that Lynch does worked so well, like fit like a glove for this film, no one else could have done it. And they just wouldn't have known to do it this way. Also, the way Lynch blocks scenes is very natural looking. He loves you to feel the environment. He loves you to take it all in. And that's important for his characters. David Lynch really hated living in Philadelphia. And he came from Alvin Straight's world. He came from Montana, Missoula, Montana, if you know Twin Peaks, actually. And, you know, Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks, and I'll get back to Straight's story here. There's a scene where he's walking, and he's walking with Sheriff Truman, and he goes, "What's that?" And then Sheriff goes, "Ducks on a pond." And he goes, "Ducks on a pond." He's just fascinated. And what's happening here is this character's grown up in the city of Philadelphia. He doesn't know what it's like to see Douglas firs. And so Lynch is enjoying that. And he really makes you want to go to Iowa. In fact, one day at work, I was on my break, and I went on Google Maps, and I really thought about taking my wife, before we had children, taking her to Lawrence, Iowa, and making the drive to Wisconsin. Just making the same trip, just to see it. There's no way we do that now. Time has passed too much. But I was really obsessed with this movie for a long time. So Lynch brings that to bear too. You really feel like you're in Iowa. The things you would see, he makes sure that you see. And so really good stuff there. So that's important scene. So then Alvin goes, and he goes after a grabber. What's a grabber? It's one of those long things, and you have a handle at the end you squeeze and it helps you grab stuff, which he's going to need, right? I think he's definitely going to need that. And it's a very funny scene, but it's actually important because what happens here is he negotiates for the grabber. You are going to see Alvin negotiate this entire film. Why is that important? Alvin is a very good negotiator, and he argues for the importance of family with almost everyone he negotiates with. What this movie is about is a big negotiation between him and his brother. He's offering something to his brother. What is it? So it's a core mystery of the film. He's going to offer his brother something. It's a negotiation. He's trying to go to the stars. What is that? You keep seeing the stars. He keeps showing you the stars after these scenes. There's a reason for that, okay? He wants to go to the stars. I'll explain that in a minute too, but that's the central core mystery is he's a negotiator, but he can't speak in this case. What can he say? In fact, when he goes to speak, he does what a lot of World War II vets did. They didn't speak, they just drank. And that's what you learn about Alvin throughout the course of the story, that he came back from the war and he just drank. And he said it made him a very mean man and created a lot of problems in his life. And so how's he going to negotiate with his brother? Really, really fascinating stuff. And so you will see him negotiate several times. Second major scene, big scene, huge, maybe the most important. I wouldn't argue with anyone that thinks this was the most important scene, and that is the pregnant hitchhiker. This girl's in her teens. She's hitchhiking. Great, funny scene. Only in a Lynch movie. He's riding along at 5 miles per hour. She's hitchhiking, and he just passes her, and she's just like this. It's a great scene. So she walks up, and he's getting ready to, bed down for the night, and she's very good dialogue. She never says I'm pregnant, which is great. It's just intimated, and he understands it. And this is a scene you'll see in the trailer, and it's very powerful. This movie, again, I'm going to say it again. If it's just about a guy on a lawnmower, the ending, when the movie ends, no big deal. If it's about what I'm saying it's about, and it is, that's the parallel story you're really attached to, the movie's powerful. It's a very powerful film. He says, I had my kids, and I gave each of them a stick. And I said, you break that. He said, of course they could. And he says, then I'd put all the sticks together and say, you break that. And he said, of course they couldn't. He said, that's family. And he's trying to convince her to go back to her family. And he says, well, look, I'll bed out here and you can have my bunk. And she says, no, I want to sit out here and do what? Look at the stars and think. They help me think. That is part of the story, okay? So she, the next day wakes up and what's he find? A bundle of sticks. Brilliant filmmaking. So it's showing that family is important. That is one of the core tenets of this film is keep your family together. And he, what's he got? His brother's long gone. 10 years. I think there's a timeline discrepancy, by the way, because Rose said the fight was in 90 something, and there's no way that could have been. This trip was supposed to take place in 96. Or she said 87, maybe. I don't know, but anyway. So that's part of the issue. Is Alvin? This girl is hitchhiking away from her family. And Alvin is on a lawnmower to try to get back to his, So this girl, he's negotiated with her to go back to her family. And that's what Alvin himself is trying to do. Good stuff. A lot of great scenes. I wish I could talk about them all, but at this hour, this would be 2 or 3 hours long. I will say one complaint about the film I have is from time to time, the lighting isn't entirely well done. And what I mean by that is it's never that the lighting's bad, that you go, ooh, that's ugly. It's always a beautiful film at all times. There's just times where you can tell there's artificial lighting, just the way it casts shadows and all that. I'm no expert on these things, and even I can see it. So it just becomes, it's the way shadows are cast and so forth. It still makes for a beautiful film. And it had to be done, but just so it's very audience can see what's happening. But it also is kind of obvious from time to time. Could be just the difficulty of filming outdoors in that part of the country at that time. Who knows? But that would be one complaint I did have about the movie. Then Alvin meets I'll get that in a minute. This is another really important scene. I don't think it's one of the 3 major scenes, but it's very important. And that's where Alvin goes down the hill and loses control of the lawnmower. And he meets Danny Reardon, who worked for John Deere. And he offers to let him stay in the backyard. We learn he's been on the road for 5 weeks. It's a long time to go visit somebody who's had a stroke, right? They're trying to tell you something. And he even says, hey, you came down the hill. He's calling Rose. He says, you went into another area code. You got to call into that area code. So they're really letting you know he's come a long, long, long way. It's done a really good job doing that. And when he calls Rose, that actually happened. He had to wait in real life. This was confirmed by Alvin Strait. He had a point where he had to get some repairs. He had to wait for his Social Security to come in order his retirement to come in order for him to move on with his journey. So he meets a guy, gets in the truck with a guy drives him to a bar, and he says, that he was a World War II vet. And Alvin says, yeah. And he says a lot of guys came back drinking hard. And we learn a story, I won't tell you right now just to keep the video a little bit shorter, but we learn a story about how Alvin did something that he's kept to himself. And Alvin keeps a lot of things to himself, a lot. And despite being a great negotiator, he keeps things to himself. And he has milk while the other guy has a beer because he's trying to stay away from alcohol. He gets back to his little encampment he has in the backyard of this guy's house. And what's it show? It shows him looking up at the stars. And I believe this is Alvin realizing that he has to forgive himself for this mistake he made. Because what happened here, he was negotiating with this World War II vet that he needed to let this go. Something had happened. And this is a secondary or tertiary, perhaps, element of the film. The film's a little bit about aging. That's kind of a side product that never is focused on, but it is about aging. A movie where aging would be a really strong theme of the film would be Wrath of Khan, Star Trek II, which makes the movie so good because it's about, Khan has come back from the past, and Kirk is aging now, and it's really good stuff. Talk about that another time. But that is, so in this movie, that is not a focus at all, but it is something, it is used to let you know that there's not a lot of time left, and that they've let a lot of time get away. And Alvin says, their faces of these soldiers that I was at war with that didn't come home, they're still young, and I'm still getting old. And there is some statements about, he's asked what it's like, what's the worst part of being old, and all that. But that's just part of his character. Really, it's not about that at all. But it is an interesting little side part of this. And as I've gotten older, I was 26 when this, 25 maybe when this movie came out. And, now I'm 48. And, I've aged quite a bit since this movie came out. And I remember I've always kept track of thinking about how old I would be at certain times. I remember when a friend of mine was telling me that they had announced the George Lucas's Star Wars prequels, and I thought, "Ooh, that's going to be 1999. I'm going to be in my late 20s." Now I'm way past what I was envisioning at that time. But anyway, all right. Then we enter Alvin's lies. Alvin tells a few lies. What are those lies? He tells people he doesn't want to be on a bus because he doesn't want someone else driving. He has been driven around by several people throughout the course of the film. He says he doesn't want to ride a truck because you sit too high. When he was on his first lawnmower, the Reds, at the beginning of the movie, he's in the back of a truck sitting up higher than everyone else in the truck. Everyone keeps offering him rides, and he lies to everyone. I think it's to keep the conversation short. He doesn't want to tell them what it's about. Finally, one person confronts him, Danny Reardon, and says, "Look, you're going to face a lot of dangers. You're going to be in hills, worse than this. Let me ride you. It's only going to take a day to do it." And he says, "Nope, I've got to finish this my own way." Very important scene. Trying to tell you, okay, this isn't just about riding a lawnmower. Alvin has a plan. He's got a plan. He's going to negotiate. Interesting. All right, he was told it gets bad until you cross the Mississippi. This is brilliant. This gets to the third and maybe most important scene, third major scene. And he's crossing the Mississippi. I wondered for years what this was about. It took time to figure it out. And he's crossing the bridge. It shows you the bridge just like it did the road. The camera from above looking down. And he looks real close to the ground, and it's showing you what he's seeing and that he is close to the ground. And all of a sudden, the music turns very, very dark. I remember Ebert, in his review of the movie, was like, I kept waiting for the other foot to drop because it's David Lynch, but no, this is just a great movie. This is where I thought, this movie's going to get weird, man. It didn't. Lynch did something brilliant. Very easy to miss. The next scene, when that music turns dark and he's on the bridge, he's crossed the Mississippi. The next scene is Alvin at night in a graveyard. What is Lynch trying to tell you? Lynch is trying to tell you that his brother might be dead. It could be too late. It's exactly what he's trying to tell you. And this scene, major scene in the movie, plays out this way, where this priest he meets, these are French trackers, right? So this is Alvin, these are original people who went out there and risked their lives. Alvin, same thing. And he says, I met Lyle in the hospital, this priest says, because he is in Wisconsin now. And he's like, I saw him, and he hadn't seen him for a while. And you can see the look. Farnsworth's acting is really good, like it might be too late. And this was the only way he could see Lyle. And he said, this is so important. This is the key. He says to him, he said, we were kids, it was cold, we would make up games. And he said, in the summer, it was only 3 months of summer, and you wanted to last forever, and we would look up in the stars. And he says, I just want to get together with Alvin one more time and just look up in the stars again. What's the very first scene you see? It's the stars. When Alvin needs to forgive himself, what do you see? Stars. When the girl says, I really need to look up in the stars and think. All right, there's this idea of resolution lies in the stars. Alvin wants to go to the stars. Really fascinating stuff. So he goes to a bar. He's just about ready to see Lyle. He goes to a bar and he has a beer. He says, I haven't had a beer in a long time, but now I want one. And the bartender's like, what do you have? And he says, well, what's a Miller Lite taste like? And I thought, I mean, give the guy a real beer. It tastes like water with soap in it is what it tastes like. Give the guy a Killian's Red or something. Anyway, so the idea here is this is hard for Alvin. Really, really hard. It's even possible he chose to ride a lawnmower so that he could say, well, I gave him my best shot, but I didn't make it in time. That's my speculation. So one last challenge here, facing his past, facing alcoholism, and he refuses the second beer and he goes. So we get to the end of the movie here, and one thing I realized is that Alvin, to make this trip, needed to have courage. This took courage. Some woman says, a lot of crazy people out there. You don't want to sleep at night? He's like, well, ma'am, I fought in the trenches of World War II. I figure, what do I have to fear in an Iowa cornfield? And they said, that scene with the hill was really scary. And so there was worse hills than that. He just kept going. He had to be brave. He had to be courageous to do this. The riding on the mower had to be dangerous. It had to be dangerous for the final scene, okay, for us to understand. So what's happened is this. No one in the movie but Alvin understands the meaning of the lawnmower. Nobody. I heard he goes to get the Reds replaced. He says, I heard you were planning on using that in a real interesting way. And Alvin's like, yeah. He says, you still plan on doing that? He's like, yeah. He goes, well, you always struck me as a smart guy until now. And there's several scenes like this where they're like, people are, just looking at his lawnmower like, what is this guy doing? What is he doing? Or Danny Reardon says, you shouldn't be riding a lawnmower like that. He's got this trailer history. It's not designed to do that. No one understands it. And in fact, in this movie, there's only two people in the world that could ever look at the lawnmower and just by looking at it, know exactly what it means. It is a negotiation piece. Alvin knows what it is, and Lyle knows what it is. So he pulls into Lyle's little drive. It's just a little shack. Alvin calls out, and he's about to cry because Lyle doesn't respond. And Farnsworth's acting once again is brilliant. And he doesn't hear anything, and he's starting to get nervous because he thinks it's too late. And then you hear, yeah, and Lyle comes out. It's Harry Dean Stanton, who's just a fantastic actor. And he says, kind of gruff, he's like, sit down, Alvin. And he sits down, and he does a double take, and it shows the lawnmower. And he says, did you ride that all the way here? You ride that thing here to see me? And Stanton says it like he thinks Alvin's a fool. And he says, yeah, Lyle, I did. And Stanton gets a tear in his eye. I don't know how he did it. That takes a heck of an actor, in my opinion, to do that. And he just he knows. He knows exactly what the lawnmower means. It means, will you forgive me? And it's a negotiation. Alvin